Okay, so there's this drunk, and he walks into a bar, a jazz bar, and he's never been in there before. It's all low lighting and cool music. And he walks up to the bar and he proceeds to get absolutely hammered, blind drunk. He's doing shot after shot after shot. And eventually, towards the end of the night, he starts to feel a rumbling in his stomach. And he needs to make a bowel movement. And he calls the barman over and he says, "Excuse me, barman, where's your toilet? Is there a toilet in this place?" And the barman says, "Yeah, okay, it's through this door, down the corridor, take 2 lefts, a right, open the door, you'll find it." And the drunk, he can't keep up with these instructions, so he wanders off down this hallway, bouncing off the walls all the way. And he's like, "Is it 2 lefts and 2 rights? What is it?" And he's just opening doors, and eventually he opens this door, and inside, is this absolutely beautiful, warm and welcoming golden toilet. And he's like, "Oh, fantastic, this is the nicest toilet I've ever been in." So he proceeds to undo his trousers and do what he came to do, right? And after he's finished, does up his trousers, off he goes into the night. And he has such a wonderful time in his jazz bar that he decides to return the next night. And then he has one more drink than he has had the previous night, so he's extra drunk. And he calls the barman over and says, "Where's the toilet?" And the barman says, "Through this door, down the hallway, 2 lefts and a right, open the door, there you are." And off he goes. But this time, because he's extra drunk, he's just bouncing off the walls, he's getting himself all turned around, doesn't know where he is, and he can't find it. And he finds himself back in the bar. And he goes back up to the barman and he says, "Where is that toilet, that golden toilet? I can't seem to find it." And the barman thinks for a second. He's like, golden toilet? And then you can see the cogs moving in his head, and eventually he says, "Golden toilet? Oh. Okay, Dave, I found the guy who shit in your saxophone." It's not a good joke. It's not a good joke. Today we're talking about the different kinds of alcoholism. What kind of alcoholic are you? Brothers, sisters, comrades and friends, welcome to Bat Country. If you're here incidentally on the back of my iceberg video, welcome, and I'm afraid that, this is normally what it's like. It's just my big dumb face saying depressing shit to the camera. If you're okay with that, good. Please do like and subscribe. If you're really okay with that, if you would like more of this kind of stuff, then head over to patreon.com/backcountrysober for the kind of backcountry sober community that's over there. Okay, so one of the risks that comes with talking about different categories of alcoholic is that it allows people in my position, people who talk about alcoholism, to kind of gatekeep it a little bit, which is to say, like, you don't qualify as this, or you're this kind of alcoholic, and that kind of thing. Which is why the American Psychiatric Administration, is that what it's called? The APA, who kind of constructs the documentation to help medical professionals treat people like alcoholics. That's why they don't use these categorizations anymore. They used to. They used to have categories like the daily drinker and the social drinker, the anxiety drinker and stuff like that, but they got rid of it all a few years ago. And now they've bundled everything, all kinds of drinking, under the single title of alcohol use disorder, or rather, more specifically, person with alcohol use disorder. And they don't differentiate between the different kinds of drinking. Their thinking being that it kind of muddies the water. And if somebody is seeking help for an alcohol problem, then it doesn't really matter the style or the manner in which they drink. But I think that it does matter. And in fact, if you walk into, I don't know, like a really big Alcoholics Anonymous meeting with like 50 people in it or something, then you'll find that they just do tend to... You'll find like 5 or 6 different styles of drinking in that room. If you speak to them all individually, you'll find that some are secret day drinkers, and some are crazy binge drinkers, and some are functioning alcoholics, and some are kind of, and they're all measuring themselves against each other. And I think it is important to make a differentiation between the style of your drinking, because the manner in which you drink has an impact on the consequences of your drinking. You're much more likely, for example, to experience delirium tremens like I did, or have acute withdrawal syndrome if you are drinking extreme amounts of hard liquor really, really quickly than you are of drinking beer every day. Right? So that's one example of how the manner in which you drink really does have an impact. It really does matter. So let's talk about the kinds that there are and what some of the characteristics of each look like. What are the behaviors of each kind of alcoholic? The first one is the young drinker, the kind of social alcoholic who is not yet suffering the consequences of chronic alcoholism, but is nonetheless an alcoholic. Ages vary. Everything about these categories varies to some degree or another. But when it comes to young people drinking, the young is quite a broad range. For the sake of putting a number on it, I'm going to call it 16 to 24. If you're 25, don't worry, I'm not calling you old because you don't fit into the young people spectrum. It's just because there are some metabolic changes which will change your relationship with alcohol as you get older. But between 16 and 24, it's very possible to be a serious alcoholic and not yet be aware. At this kind of age, for the largest section of the group, drinking is going to be tied to socializing and to partying. But that's not true of everybody. Okay, so even at aged 18, I moved out of home, talking about my own experience. I moved out and went off to be a student. And even then, I found myself drinking alone, or leaving parties, leaving social events where there was alcohol readily available in order to go home and continue drinking and getting blind drunk on my own. So I'm aware that there is no prototype for this drinker, but it has a couple of different manifestations. One is the kind of person who only drinks socially, but drinks to such wild excess that it should be obvious that there is a problem, because it will have consequences like with the law or with injuries. You're unlikely, not impossible, but it's unlikely that you'll be experiencing liver failure or, pancreatitis or ketoacidosis at this kind of age. It is possible, but more likely the consequences of your drinking are going to be things like academic. If you're a student, you're going to miss study. You're going to miss deadlines. If you're working, then you're going to stop showing up to work. So they're kind of social consequences at this stage, or physical consequences not directly tied to alcoholism. Like, so falling over and breaking your ankle, or getting a head injury, or into a car crash, that kind of thing. Unfortunately, right, this was true of me, and I hate talking about this stuff because thinking about my own youth makes me cringe anyway, just because I was a socially awkward, weird person. I still am, which is why I sit in an empty room and speak to strangers. This is more comfortable for me than attending an AA meeting and telling my truth there. I prefer to do it here. But as a young man, I was worse. And drinking heavily at that age, you tend to think it's opening doors for you with regards to things like sexual opportunity or bonding with social groups. But the truth is that really you're just kind of suppressing your anxiety, and you're doing things that are going to embarrass you. You're going to wake up embarrassed of things you did and said the night before. And really, you're going to carry that embarrassment throughout the rest of your life. I still cringe at some of the things I did and said when I was a young drinker, even though I'm now an old man. I still think about that stuff pretty regularly, and it's still like occasionally I'll be walking down the street at 3 o'clock on a perfectly normal afternoon, and suddenly a memory of something I said when I was 19 will pop back into my brain, and I'll go, oh, ooh, I'll make that noise just autonomically. 16 to 24, that's the age when you find your feet. And if you're problematically drinking already at that age, you're cutting your feet out from underneath you. You're supposed to be enjoying it, and alcohol, if you're a problem drinker and you know it early, it's going to be getting in your way already. It's already holding you back. Look, if you're 16 to 24 and the thought has crossed your mind that you might have a problem, you have a problem. Okay? I wish I'd had the fucking common sense, because I had that thought when I was 19. I recognized that my drinking was a problem, but I never really admitted it to myself. So I fell into this group. I was the young adult social alcoholic type. If you're already thinking it's a problem, it's already a problem. So that's number one. That's young social alcoholics. Number two is a very big group. This is people who are self-medicating with alcohol. And it can include people who don't even know that they're self-medicating with alcohol. The self-medicating alcoholic, what does that entail? I'm going to summarize it like this, and I'm going to speak to you directly. If you are drinking to change how you feel, you're self-medicating. Okay, and I understand how broad that definition is, but I am convinced it is accurate. So what does this drinking style look like? Well, this is, for me, the most common kind of alcoholism. And I'm not suggesting everybody who drinks like this is an alcoholic, but I am suggesting every alcoholic has drunk like this. So let me tell you the image that I have of this particular drinker. This is your auntie. Okay, this is your auntie sat on the sofa, 2.5 bottles of wine deep on a Wednesday night. Or it is your uncle who's going through a divorce, who is surrounded by empty beer cans that he's been drinking since he got home from work. It's 11 p.m. and he's already had like 15 on just a normal work night. It's also, it can be anyone. It can be a professional athlete who has suffered an injury and doesn't know what to do with their time. Or it can be someone who works incredibly long hours and then gets 2 or 3 days off and then just fills that time with drinking just to wouldn't be a Bat Country video if I didn't punch the mic at some point. It is anybody who is drinking to manage stress or anxiety or boredom or loneliness or grief. And this covers a lot of people who haven't yet realized that the alcohol they're drinking night in, night out, even though they're not getting blind drunk, it is getting on top of them. Here's the moment it gets on top of you. If you are a self-medication drinker, it's the moment if you have a 9-to-5 job, it's the moment on Thursday that you're looking forward to a drink on Friday. The moment you say, even if it's just internally, you go, I can't wait for Friday evening so I can have a drink. Big red flag should go up in your brain. Why are you looking forward to that drink so much? What benefit is that drink bringing you? Because my guess would be that you think it's going to prevent you from worrying about the stress and anxiety of your 9-to-5 for a little while. And perhaps, in a sense, it is. But that stress and that anxiety is not going anywhere. It's still there. It's still going to be there on Monday morning, only worse. This one is a dangerous drinking type. Self-medicating with alcohol is incredibly dangerous because it starts as relief and then quickly evolves into dependence. And once it does that, you become a functioning alcoholic for a while, and then you might become a chronic alcoholic. This stuff, 100% of the time, is progressive. A lot of us say that alcohol is a coping tool. We tend to think of alcohol as a coping mechanism, right? But it's such a shitty coping mechanism. It is better to feel bad. It is better to feel the full weight of grief or of anxiety, of depression, than it is to think that you can combat it by drinking. And that's why this kind of insidious, creeping, self-medicating alcoholism is so dangerous. And it's why that's why most of us go through this phase at some point. The sitting on the sofa drinking, the starting to say no to obligations and events because you'd rather be alone, or you'd rather drink your problems away rather than go and be sociable and happy. Perhaps the third type to talk about is a phase that comes after self-medication, as I just mentioned, and that is functioning alcoholism, or if you want to feel extra fancy, high-functioning alcoholism. I've devoted too much time and bandwidth in the past to talking about how much I hate the phrase functioning alcoholism, but I found myself using it more and more, so just it does have some utility as a phrase, so let's just use it for now, until I can find a better way to convince everybody to stop saying it. But what functioning alcoholism often looks like is a person who holds down a job or holds down a career and a family and is able to navigate their responsibilities without imploding all the time and without ending up in cuffs or in the hospital. And from the outside, they might even look successful. There are a number of people who navigate alcoholism, active addiction, even while they're outwardly succeeding. Michael Phelps is a good example, who was seeking alcohol treatment even while he was winning gold medals. But the reason Michael Phelps was seeking treatment is because even for elite level, high-functioning alcoholics, there is a limit, and it falls apart eventually for everybody. Otherwise, he wouldn't have ever needed to seek treatment, right? So, even for functioning alcoholics, there is a limit to how long you will function. And let's not forget that the important part of the phrase functioning alcoholic is not the word functioning, it is the word alcoholic. So whenever anybody tells me they are a functioning alcoholic, which does happen from time to time, it's the most insensitive, stupid thing to say to a recovering alcoholic that I can possibly imagine. But people have said it to me, to my face. I just hear alcoholic. I don't hear them say, I am a functioning alcoholic. I hear, I am an alcoholic. I just haven't yet bottomed out or sought treatment. So, fuck off with your functioning alcoholism. As far as their drinking is concerned, well, they do have a different drinking pattern from self-medicators or from chronic alcoholics. They tend to be drinking smaller amounts more often. Okay, so I kind of went through this period myself where I was drinking a shooter of vodka in the morning, going to work as a senior executive, and then across lunch I would drink 3 more shooters of vodka, and then I would drink heavily in the evening. And very few people ever saw me really drunk. Very few people would know that I was drinking the quantities that I was back then. But it can't last forever. You can't maintain that kind of balance forever, because alcoholism is a progressive condition, and you will start drinking more and more to maintain your homeostasis. And that will mean eventually leading something of a double life, where you are actively trying to conceal your drinking from the people around you in order to maintain your outward appearance of success and functioning. So a good way to tell whether you're kind of crossing that threshold into functioning alcoholism, or whether you're already there, is to consider how much time you spend convincing yourself that you're okay. Because I remember this took up a huge amount of my own bandwidth, was rationalization. Telling myself that because I hadn't lost everything, because I was able to afford my expensive apartment in Zagreb, and because I hadn't been fired, or because I was still making good decisions professionally, that I must be okay. And negotiating with myself about when it was okay to be really drunk versus when I needed to appear kind of leveled out. And all of this bargaining and self-rationalization, it takes a toll. It's exhausting. And if you're spending any of your time trying to convince yourself that you're doing okay, my guess is you're not doing okay. Fourth, next up, is the binge drinker. This is the one that brought me close to death, really. But again, binge drinking exists on a kind of wide spectrum. So you will have people who really only derail with alcohol once every 7 or 8 months. But then their drinking within their binge period is so incredibly intense that it does leave them with consequences, like financial problems. Perhaps they lose work because of that binge period, or they wake up with weird aches and pains in their liver or their pancreas, or they have bruises and stuff that they can't account for, or they have withdrawal symptoms, even if they're only drinking heavily once a year. At the other end of that spectrum, which is much closer to my own pattern of drinking, is that the binges are every couple of months and they are unbelievably extreme, where it's a psych ward after you finish drinking. That was my pattern towards the end of my binge drinking, was that it wasn't just a weekend for me anymore. It would be 2-3 weeks of hard liquor, barely leaving the bed except to go and seek out more alcohol. Until eventually something would change in my brain and I would sober up. I'd survive the binge and then would immediately need severe, emergency medical treatment for the severity of my withdrawals. Not everybody is like that. You can be a binge drinker just drinking really, really hard on a Friday and Saturday night and then being sober the rest of the week. That doesn't not make you an alcoholic. You can still be an alcoholic for sure with that drinking pattern. But what marks out a binge drinker is that once you've started drinking, it becomes impossible to stop until some distant point in the future. So what a healthy drinker might look like, perhaps a healthy drinker, whatever the fuck that is, might be able to pick up a glass of wine or two on a Friday night and then stop before they are absolutely blasted. And then they can perhaps do it again on a Saturday afternoon and then stop. And then not on the Sunday and then not again till the following weekend. That might be a relatively healthy pattern of drinking. But a binge drinker, once they have that first alcoholic drink, that switch is flicked and they will not be able to stop. They just won't. This is also true of gambling addicts and binge eaters and other kind of drug addictions, where there's a little bit of compulsive behavior mixed in with the physical addiction. There is a compulsion to continue drinking as well. As soon as an atom of alcohol is consumed, then it has to be all the alcohol. For a binge drinker, it's either 0 or 100, and there is no middle ground. And if that's you, if you are unable to stop once you've started, then this might be your category. You might be a binge drinker, even if you don't think that you are. Then there's a fifth category, which is the chronic dependent alcoholic. This is the one that you have in mind when I say the word alcoholic. This is the Alcoholics Anonymous stereotype. This is the drunk under a bridge stereotype. This is your elderly grandfather not really giving a fuck about anything anymore stereotype. Except, it doesn't have to be your elderly grandfather, and it doesn't have to be the drunk under a bridge, and it doesn't have to be the AA stereotype. A chronic alcoholic can fit a lot of different models, but they're kind of categorized by a few characteristics. So one is that they drink to drunkenness every day. Another is that they experience cravings if they have no access to alcohol in the immediate moment. Perhaps they wake up needing to drink. Chronic alcoholics, like binge drinkers, are also likely to experience quite severe withdrawal symptoms if their access to alcohol is cut off for any reason, if they try to dry out. It's particularly dangerous for chronic alcoholics and binge drinkers to just go completely cold turkey. And then there's a kind of psychological differentiation, which is very sad. And that's that for people in chronic alcoholism, the drinking is no longer about pleasure. In fact, there is almost no pleasure in this person's life anymore. The drinking is not to make them feel good. It's to stop them feeling bad. stop them feeling worse. And that's a very sad position to get to. So I got to this stage, like my own drinking towards the end was a blend of binge drinking and chronic alcoholism, where I was drinking binge levels of alcohol every day, day in and day out. So I had the pattern of a chronic alcoholic, but the volume of a binge drinker. And when you get to that phase, which is like essentially the final stage of this late stage alcoholism, the next stage is death. Once you get to that stage, there is no joy, there is no pleasure in it. You're not doing it because it's fun. You're not having a whale of a fucking time when you're a bottle and a half of vodka deep and it's only 6 p.m. and you have the rest of the evening and the night to face, and you've already run out of alcohol, and your only thought is on how to acquire more alcohol. Once you get to this stage, your daily life is full of fear and anxiety. And the thought of somebody coming to the door or your phone ringing gives you genuine anxiety. And the only way to deal with that is to hit yourself on the head with the alcohol hammer until you just can't think anymore, until there are no thoughts. That's what chronic alcoholism is. It's using alcoholism not to stop feeling things, but to completely obliterate your ability to think. It's to turn off your humanity. That is chronic alcoholism. So that's the stage it gets to, is ask yourself, are you drinking to feel good, or are you drinking to not feel bad? And you'll know where you are. And then the sixth and final one is a little bit like the self-medicating alcoholic that I mentioned earlier, but I think it deserves its own category. It deserves its own prototype. And that is the grey zone drinker. And the reason why this one deserves its own entry on my little made-up list here is because the grey zone drinker can take a huge amount of different manifestations. It can present in a lot of different ways. The thing that ties it all together is that there is a growing concern about the level that a grey zone drinker is drinking. They become increasingly worried about it as their intake increases. They worry about how much they're drinking quite often. And quite often, the consequences of a grey zone drinker's drinking are not yet catastrophic. But they will be, and they can kind of sense it coming. Maybe you've realized that your tolerance to alcohol is starting to increase, which means your alcohol intake is increasing in parallel with it, and you started drinking perhaps more than you intended to drink. You've had one more glass of wine than you did the previous week, or one more beer, or one more whiskey and coke or whatever. But you also have a sense that you can regain control, right? Because you're lying to yourself as a grey zone drinker. You still believe that you have some power over this creeping condition. And grey zone drinkers can appear in a lot of different contexts. So it can be sitting alone on the sofa every night, slowly drinking more and more and more, and worrying more and more and more. But it can also be, it can happen without you noticing. So for example, just off the top of my head, a musician might be a grey zone drinker. If they're actively performing, they might notice that their intake is starting to creep up. But because it's all around them, they might not notice. Or perhaps you work in hospitality and you notice that every day after your shift, you're staying slightly later and later and putting more and more money behind the bar. And you started to worry about that. That could also be you. You also qualify as a grey zone drinker. This one is characterized by a growing concern about how much you're drinking. If you get any value out of this kind of stuff, please do like and subscribe. It makes me feel very good in my aging alcoholic heart. Do try out betterwithoutbooze.me. That's betterwithoutbooze.me for the world's best and most comprehensive sobriety app. But don't feel like you have to. I'm not your dad. I can't tell you what to do. Once again, thank you for watching. And as always, good luck out there.